Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 363. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have back with us, for a third time, the internationally acclaimed and award-winning epic high fantasy author, Todd Fahnestock. Todd.
Hi.
See? It took me 3 times, but I actually said your name right away.
That was correct. I didn't notice a hitch there. Not even a single hitch.
See, like you say, you just pronounce it as you read it, and you can't mess up. So
you know what? I mean, that is literally true with my name. It's interesting how many people do not just pronounce it like it's read.
Right. See, perfect. And so, Todd, you were in a few months ago, and you were talking about Slater and the Dragon, which was one of the
Yes.
books that you were talking about. And once again, out of the blue, you wrote another book.
Yes.
You just like it's and there it is, Falling to Fly. But this is not a fantasy or science fiction. This is an inspirational book.
There's some things that seem a little bit like science fiction in it. But no, it is literally the story of my life as regards my journey as an author. And that's why the subtitle is the book to read before you give up on your writing dreams. So essentially it starts with me when the time that I first decided I wanted to write stories, and then pretty much, I mean, the Falling to Fly is an appropriate title because it's a lot about failing. Right? This book is a lot about the places where I tripped, a lot about the places where I stumbled, a lot about like running at a door and then having it slammed in my face, running up a hill only to tumble back down. The cool thing is it is inspirational towards the end where I talk about a lot of the successes that I'm having nowadays. But I think the reason that it's a cool book for writers, aspiring writers, even writers that are well along the journey, it's kind of a pick me up. It's like, you know what, if I can take all these hits and keep writing, you can too, that's sort of a little bit of the theme of the story.
And so, it's a story, but is it also almost in a way like just kind of like a how-to book or just an inspirational book for those that are thinking like, I'm giving up writing or.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the person who's thinking about giving up writing, not that I would necessarily encourage you to jump back into the gladiatorial pit and go at it again, but if you wanted to, this is a good pick me up to do it. And there's actually some advice about writing in there, about, persevering, about how to handle your demons, about dealing with imposter syndrome, a lot of more almost, I hesitate to say metaphysical, but more like holistic aspects to coming at writing, as opposed to don't use adverbs, which is good advice, generally speaking, but it's not that detailed. It's more, so I liken it to a cross between Stephen King's On Writing, or at least the first part of Stephen King's On Writing, where he talks about his CV and all the different stories in his life that kind of led to him being a writer, and Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. That was something that a friend of mine, after he read it, he's like, this is like the Kitchen Confidential of the publishing industry, because I go into behind the curtain of, the places that the publishing contracts I've had with Trad Publishing. I go behind the curtain with the indie publishing experiences that I've had, and just kind of talk about my story. I don't lambast anybody. It's not like read this to see where I'm going to get revenge on all the people that turned me away. It's not that at all. It's just my honestly vulnerable moments where I came up to a threshold, and if it smacked me down, how long it took me to recover, what I did after that, and it's told through a series of anecdotes about my actual life. There's some interesting stories in there. In fact, the story of how this book came to be written is interesting in and of itself, because I almost threw it in the garbage. I almost threw it away. Yeah, it almost didn't exist. So this was, in the beginning, supposed to be a how-to book. It was supposed to be my Save the Cat, I don't know if you've ever heard of Save the Cat. It's like a screenwriter's how-to book. It was supposed to be my Hero of 1,000 Faces, or, here's what I do when I write, and here's what you ought to do when you write. That's what it was supposed to be. And I got done with it, and I just I guess I just kind of followed the muse. And when I got done with it, I looked back and I was like, well, this is only 20 to 25% that. It's not at all what I was trying to do. And I was about to start essentially gutting it, just pulling out the things that didn't have like a specific, here's the chapter on, writing this kind of writing. And here's the chapter on how I overcome writer's block. And here's the chapter on, as I was about to do that, my assistant, Becca, whom you've interviewed, she's also an author. She took it away from me. She's like, don't you dare. And I was like, well, no, it needs to be fixed. She's like, no, it actually doesn't need to be fixed. It's just not the book you thought it was. It's a different kind of book. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, I swear, for me, this was lightning in a bottle. And what you're talking about right now is taking the cap off the bottle and polishing the inside while you let the lightning out. She's like, don't do it. Just, I tell you what. And she took it away from me. And I was pretty leery because I trust myself when I need to revise something. I need to get into it and do some work on it. And I'm not afraid to do that. And she's like, I tell you what, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get 6 of your super fans. We're going to get them on a Zoom call. We're going to have them read the book. It's a very short book. It's like 46,000 words. It's pretty thin book. Right. And we're going to get them on a Zoom call, and you're going to be muted and you're going to be blocked. Like they're not going to be able to see you. They're not going to be able to hear you. And we're going to discuss this. I'm going to lead the conversation, and you're going to see what they actually think of this story that you have right now. And I said, all right, but I'm telling you, if they feel the way that I feel about this, that it needs to be uprooted and redone, then your credibility is going into the trash can with me. Like, you're not going to get another chance like this to just take a book away from me. Right. Well, long story short, clearly, obviously, she was right. I mean, soup to nuts, top to bottom, she was right. They loved it. I mean, there were some things that needed to be fixed, and they kind of pointed out certain areas that I then went back and revised. But essentially what it showed me was, this is not a writing how-to book. This is a writing why-to book, right? It's a pick you, first of all, I think that, like, from what I've heard from readers, is that it's spellbinding. It's like, I can't believe you told that story about your life. You almost died in that oil tanker back in 1993. Wow. How did you get out of that? Or, climbing that mountain and almost dying on that mountain, or meeting Gary Paulson and having the name of your inner voice kind of have the sound of his voice. I mean, there's just different stories in this whole thing as I go through this journey. Okay. He wrote Hatchet, which is a very popular young.
Oh, yes. I remember that. You always had to read Hatchet,
yes,
as a kid.
Yes. It's a great story. Anyways, he was instrumental in me getting published for the first time. And anyways, I talk about the voices in my head in this book. And one of the voices in my head, I call the Little Rebel. And the Little Rebel is the one. Is it okay if I curse on this show, or should I bleep myself out? Because, like, the Little Rebel.
Oh, bleep yourself. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Little Rebel is like, F this, F that, go that direction. Right. Like, he is not, he is not polite. He doesn't care about consequences. He very much will throw the baby out with the bathwater. However, he has saved my writing career on numerous times, because this Little Rebel will push through whatever the barrier is, whatever it is. It's like, F that, we're going through. Right. I mean, like, so, and I kind of define that voice. And at the end of the Gary Paulson chapter, I'm like, after talking to him and hearing some of his stories, I mean, that guy was that person sort of out in the world. Like, there's a story in there that he told me where he goes into a bar and just picks a fight with everybody and just gets into a brawl. Right. And so from that point forward, the Little Rebel always sounds a little bit like Gary Paulson to me.
And that's interesting. You bring up the why too, because that's usually, when it comes to authors, the most important thing is, when you're putting a story together, is asking why. Why am I doing this?
Yep.
And so do you see this as almost as a companion piece to some of the how-to
for sure
writing books?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily a companion to any book in specific, but I think in its genre, I would say if there's a genre of how-to books, this would be not necessarily in that vein. Though, like I said, there are some parts in there where it's like, how do I overcome writer's block? How do I pick myself back up again after getting a rejection? I mean, those things are useful, but it's really more of a, reading between the lines of the stories from my life and saying, and seeing yourself in them, right? Because I think the things that I address, a lot of writers, I've heard a lot of writers say, like such things like, why should I write a book? Like, I'm not better than this guy that I revere as a writer. Why should I even try? Like, there's already books out by these great writers. Why should I even start? Or, that's not good enough. My high school English teacher hated my stuff, so I'm just not going to write anymore. I mean, like all of these things that so many writers have experienced and gone through, I talk about my trip through those things and what I did. And so maybe there is some of that can be useful to some people. And I'm not going to make the supposition that all people will be able to utilize these, but so far so good. There's been a really good response to this story so far, about how people feel that it's inspired them to go after the dream, to keep going after the dream.
Right. And so how is the book split up then? And you have
so yeah, essentially it is mostly chronological from when I was 14 and I had this recurring dream. The book starts out with this recurring dream where I'm literally in the dream falling off a cliff. And it happened right about the time that my parents were getting a divorce, right? And so it was this, I mean, it's probably, anybody who's a dream analyst could probably analyze it, in a second and say, oh, well, that's, the big bad world is coming for you. Your safe base is dissolving away and you're feeling like you're in a free fall, right? So I would have this recurring dream where I was on this promontory, like the prow of a ship, right? I'm standing on this rock promontory, high up. I mean, like so high up that it almost looks like a satellite snapshot to look at the ground below. And behind me, the promontory connects into a mountain with a safe little trail. And so I immediately head towards that because I don't want to be on this, very scary, 5 foot wide promontory and fall off the cliff. But I run into an invisible wall. And then the invisible wall starts moving toward the very edge of the cliff and it pushes me off and I fall and fall and fall. And then I wake up, right? And so this happens to me over the course of a couple of years where this dream comes. Sometimes it comes once a week. Sometimes it comes once a month, sometimes every 2 months, but it keeps coming back. And finally, as my parents are getting divorced and I've gone from being afraid to being angry about the whole thing, in the dream, instead of letting the invisible wall push me off, the little rebel jumps up and says, F that, and then runs at the edge of the promontory and leaps off. And from doing that, like I'm thinking, well, I'm going to die, right? And inside my head in the dream, this little voice says, if you can hold yourself together, if you can just hold yourself together, you can fly. And of course, as I'm falling, in an arc this time, because I jumped, right? I'm like, how the hell does that help me? I don't know. I mean, like hold myself together. How's that going to make me fly? But then immediately I start imagining my body flying apart in 6 pieces, like my head coming off, my 2 arms coming off, my 2 legs coming off. And I hold them together. And as soon as I do, I see a telephone wire. And like in some Looney Tunes cartoon, I'm like, oh, I got to make it for the telephone wire. And I make it to the telephone wire and I go boing, and I bounce off the telephone wire. I land on a house. I land on a couch outside the house and I land on the ground. And I'm on the ground. And I look back at the big promontory that's like huge in the distance. And I'm like, oh, I did it. I got off the thing, And then the dream came back 2 more times. I did the exact same thing, run, jump, telephone wire, house, couch, ground twice. And then I never had that dream again. And the morning I woke up after the last time I had the dream, I started writing my first story. And that's how Falling to Fly begins. And then that first chapter is like a microcosm of the entire journey of my writing career, all the way to the end. I mean, like there's actually literally a moment in my life where the cliff comes for me and I got to leap off it, or I'm going to fall and fall and fall for the rest of my life. Right. I won't tell you what that is. I don't want to spoil too much from the story. But there's definitely a turning point. I talk a lot about commitment. I kind of coin a couple of levels of commitment. You've got your toothbrush commitment. You've got your your homework commitment, and then you've got your spouse commitment, like, so toothbrush commitment. If you don't brush your teeth one night or 2 nights, like, it's not the end of the world. You just jump back in the cycle the next time. Nobody's ever going to notice. If you don't do your homework or you're late to work a couple of times, like, your boss may harangue you, or you might get a lower grade or whatever. And nobody wants their boss to harangue them, or nobody wants a lower grade, but you're going to survive, right? If you got your spousal commitment and you miss a couple times with that and sleep with somebody else, well, that's a whole different kettle of fish. That doesn't just go away, right? I mean, that could upset your entire family balance. It could destroy your finances. It could rip your whole world apart, right? And I talk about these different levels of commitment that I had to my writing, and that moment where I like jump off the cliff, metaphorically speaking, in my life. It's that moment where I'm like, you know what? This is a spousal commitment. Now, come hell or high water, I'm going to stick to this. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not leaving this time. I'm not going to set it aside this time. And that's when things started to happen for me. So that's also in the book.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Before we started recording, you did mention, that, I always ask good questions. So I'm going to ask you a really good question. Okay?
Outstanding. I'm ready.
All right. Why was the couch outside?
That's an excellent question, because the details are the most important, aren't they? And it is a dream, so who the hell knows, right? But I mean, like, in the dream, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, those telephone wires, if I can just make it to the telephone wires, maybe I can boing off them, right? And of course I did. And as soon as I did that, I'm like, well, I'm still like, 100 feet in the air. I'm still going to go splat when I come down. I need something that's not quite so tall. And then, of course, the house is there, and I land on it on the sort of angle of the roof and slide down and then jump off the house. And I'm like, well, I'm still 20 feet up in the air. It's still going to break both my legs. And it's almost like, as I imagined what I needed, therefore then it appeared, right? And at the edge of the house. Yeah. And it's interesting you asked that, because in the dream, my imagination created this dilapidated, old, likely couch that had been put out to go to the dump. Clearly, you can see the springs coming out of it. It's not like a brand new couch, stuffing coming out of it. Like, it's sitting there in the weather for who knows how long till this family takes it to the dump, right? I mean, that was how my brain explained that away, that same question that you're asking.
Is this book for a new audience that maybe haven't read your other works?
I think this book isn't even just for writers. It's for anyone who's ever had a dream. I mean, a lot of the anecdotes, a couple of the super fans that we had do the beta reader test, 2 of them, in fact, were not writers at all. One of them was like a reader who was a wife of one of the writers that was also on that. And then another one is just like a really avid reader who doesn't want to be a writer at all. And both of them commented to me, wow, I so identify with that. One of them was like, I was getting a divorce and things were going this, sliding sideways, and I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do in my career. And my career was on shaky ground. And she's like, and a lot of these stories really helped me. I identified with the struggle when you don't know what's going to happen and you have to make a decision and you got to move forward. So, they both said this isn't just for writers. I mean, it's marketed that way because that is really its main market, but apparently it breathes outside that particular enclosure.
I've noticed too. So how does this kind of fit within your, how does this kind of fit within your library of all your other books then as well?
Yeah. So I call it one of my one-offs. So I do high fantasy, right? As you know, epic fantasy, I've got 23 novels of epic fantasy out there. And I have 4 that are not epic fantasy, right? I've got my time travel novel, which is, it's just a random sort of thing that came upon me. I've got my 1980s coming of age road trip story with a touch of magic, which doesn't really have a genre. I have no idea what that genre is. I guess a coming of age story, fantasy coming of age story. So that's not epic fantasy. And then I have the memoir that I wrote of my son, my 14-year-old son, and I hiking the Colorado Trail, 450 miles from Denver to Durango through the Rockies, 5 weeks. We were alone together. That's a story that is a memoir. It's not a fantasy story. And now Falling to Fly, which is my, if an author comes up to my booth and says, what do I do to start? Now I have a book to hand them. I'm like, read this book. That's what you do to start.
Okay. If people want to learn more about your book and this book in particular, and also your other books, where's the best place they could go to?
ToddFahnestock.com. So
right.
ToddFahnestock.com. And there it is right there on the screen.
And you already have it as an audiobook then too.
Yes. And actually I'm the voice on the audiobook. You see my studio that I kind of hastily pushed some of it aside so that it wouldn't look quite so nappy on this podcast.
Right.
But yeah, and actually I recommend the audiobook to anybody who wants to read this. Do the audiobook if you like audiobooks. I mean, the regular book is great, but I think I really was taken by a passion when I was recording this audiobook, and it is me reliving these moments, and you get it in my own voice.
Right. So that is Falling to Fly, the book to read before you give up on your writing dreams.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming back on, Todd. And this being your third time, you do now get the moniker friend of the show. So
outstanding.
You made it. Yes, you made it. You made the club.
I remember you dangling that in front of me the last time. I'm like, okay, well, I got to get on again. In fact, I'll confess to you, that is why I wrote Falling to Fly. It's really a crappy book. And I just banged it out so that I could get on the show again and be a friend of the show.
Well, thank you so much, Todd, for coming back on, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Barney. Such a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Right. And there was, and then some science, like, because I always listen to these science podcasts, and then some science podcast said that that technically, because most of our body is actually made of like bacteria and like little tiny like things that live on us, is that we are more than 50% actually just bacteria and not our own cells. Yeah. So we're not. So when you actually
I have a hard time believing that.
Yeah.
Of course, it would explain, like, whenever you have like a creepy crawly sensation on your back, it could actually be creepy crawlies in your skin cruising around,
I gotta say,
like,
are we?
What's that?
Oh no, I'm Googling this just to make sure I'm not inventing that. Yeah.
I mean, I finally got around to believing that we're 90% water. Now we're also 50% vermin. Like, I don't know.
Than our own cells. I think that is, yeah, here it is. I was way off. 10 times more. Of all the bacteria living inside you that would fill half a gallon jug, there are 10 times more bacteria cells in the body than human cells, according to microbiologists in the University of Idaho. So